Did Otis Redding feel destiny brush his shoulder when he whistled the carefree outro of Dock of the Bay? 3 dawns after that impromptu melody echoed through a Memphis control room, the 26-year-old Crown Prince of Soul vanished beneath a Wisconsin lake. Official files talk about fog, icing, and an inexperienced pilot. Today, we peel back studio confessions, money feuds, and cockpit warnings that reveal a countdown only a select few heard ticking. Strap in. The story that went down with that Beechcraft wasn't just a young superstar. It was an unwritten chapter of American music. Before brass sections blasted and screams bounced off theater balconies, a barefoot boy in Macon, Georgia was singing to keep the lights on. Otis Ray Redding Jr. entered the world on September 9, 1941, in a shotgun house where dust slipped through floorboards and gospel spilled from every porch. His mother, Fanny, directed the Vinneville Baptist Choir and drilled hymns into her children as fiercely as multiplication tables. His father, a part-time Air Force base worker and sometimes sharecropper, juggled odd jobs that rarely met the week's food bill. Otis learned early that a voice could stretch a nickel further than any plow. By 10, he was pounding piano at New Hope Baptist, soaking up call and response cadences that later shaped his trademark ad-lib screams. At 14, he talked his way into the Douglas Theater talent show, clinching first prize 15 weeks straight until management banned him to give other kids oxygen. Legend says he spent those winnings on a battered scooter and a red sport coat, proof, he joked, that the spotlight fit him better than any dress code. In high school, he hooked up with guitarist Johnny Jenkins' group, the Pine Toppers, as unpaid driver, gear hauler, and emergency baritone. Long rides across Georgia Peach Country doubled as master classes. Jenkins blistered frets in the back seat while Otis practiced timing each shout with truck stop mile markers. One rainy afternoon outside St. Mary's, a club owner heard the driver, warming up, shoved Jenkins aside, and insisted the big voice kids sing the late set. Crowd tips tripled, and a pattern locked in. Otis would accidentally steal the mic so often that Jenkins began leaving deliberate space in the set list. Stories of that make and grind often skipped the fear that shadowed each ride. Southern highways were no friend to a van full of black musicians in segregated rest stops. More than once, Otis smoothed over confrontations by dazzling suspicious policemen with a cappella gospel, melting tension long enough to pack equipment and escape. Those nerve-wracking detours pressed raw emotion into his every note and hardened a performer who knew applause today could give way to sirens tomorrow. Yet the biggest risk still lay ahead. When an open audition at Stax Records beckoned in late 1962, Jenkins invited his trusty driver for moral support. Fate intervened. Studio time ran long. Jenkins's session fizzled, and engineer Chip's Momans shrugged at the lanky kid pacing the hallway. One take of These Arms of Mine flooded the room with velvet desperation. Executives glanced at each other, scribbled a bare-bones contract, and waved him back into the booth. By the time the acetate cooled, a busboy from Macon had traded the Georgia back roads for the slippery staircase of stardom. And that staircase was steeper and far less stable than anyone guessed. When 3 separate charts carry your name, applause can drown out the crack forming under your feet. From late 63 through 66, Redding fired off an R&B revolution. Pain in My Heart, Respect, and the seismic Try a Little Tenderness cracked car radios and juke joints from Harlem to Hamburg. Each release carried volcanic horn punches, sweaty crescendos, and his signature sprocket growl that critics called Soul's Niagara. British rockers worshipped him. Mick Jagger studied the breathy delays in every ad-lib, and white teen magazines labeled him the Mad Macon Shouter, a moniker that both thrilled his manager and annoyed his mother. But behind the backslap headlines churned a punishing grind. A typical 1965 week read like a military log. Detroit Ballroom Monday, St. Louis Club Tuesday, Memphis Studio Wednesday, Virginia Beach Armory Thursday, and a pair of Carolina back-to-backs by weekend. 289 dates that year alone, most done in a converted school bus with blown spring coils. Seats were so cramped that bassist James Alexander slept in the aisle, wedged between amps. Otis handed out cough drops like communion wafers because the guys' throats cracked from diesel fumes. Finances, supposedly flush, formed another racket. Stax's distribution handshake with Atlantic Records paid Otis pennies on the retail dollar, and mechanical royalties were clouded by vague studio costs. Whenever he cornered accountant Joe Galkin, the answer floated somewhere between recoupable expenses and industry standard. Bandmates started noticing stacks of show settlement envelopes handed to Otis backstage, only to watch him count a fraction in the seat row, the rest swallowed by management's leather briefcase. He soothed their doubts with promises. Better hotels next tour, a raise soon, maybe even personal publishing deals, so each barquet could taste long-term mailbox money. Still, highlight reels kept rolling. In spring '66, he tore through Europe on the famed Stax Volt Review, wielding a towel like a matador's cape while Booker T's organ sizzled behind him. French critics dubbed him l'athlète de la voix, the athlete of voice. Yet the same flight that delivered his Paris rave reviews also delivered a letter from the IRS detailing overdue self-employment taxes. To cover the difference, management added more state fair dates and, crucially, pitched the idea of buying a small corporate aircraft to sidestep all-night drives. On paper, it made sense. Fewer missed flights, more gigs squeezed in. In practice, it bought Otis a ticking time bomb wrapped in leather upholstery. His touring schedule, already a bullwhip, now felt limitless, a calendar with no breathable gaps. And the next expansion step was Monterey Pop, where ambition finally outran oxygen. Sometimes 20 minutes in California can rearrange a lifetime of expectations. The Monterey International Pop Festival, held in June 1967, was Woodstock before Woodstock. Love beads, Technicolor caftans, and enough narcotic haze to cloud the Pacific. Otis landed the Saturday night slot only after the Grateful Dead insisted the Soul Man deserved prime turf. Clad in an emerald green suit that flashed brighter than the stage lights, he opened with shakes so ballistic that beachside vendors 3 blocks away began dancing behind hot dog grills. Hippie culture, until then wary of showband's slickness, suddenly bowed to the Macon preacher's son. That short set minted a new template. Rock audiences could and would buy Deep South soul if delivered with volcanic conviction. Offers from Fillmore West and college arenas flooded in, each higher than the last. But crossover dreams carried hidden costs. The new rooms demanded bigger horn sections, psychedelic lighting rigs, and union stagehands. To meet the ask, Otis's manager renegotiated rider clauses, meaning more flights, less sleep, and tighter turnarounds. Within 80 days of Monterey, he chalked up 65 shows and 1 emergency room visit for exhaustion. The strain was physical, too. Years of nightly shrieks left nodules scarring his vocal cords. Doctors in Memphis found throat polyps so swollen they warned of permanent loss if he didn't stop singing immediately. For Otis, still chasing crossover lightning, that prescription felt like exile. He booked surgery, swallowed silence, and retreated to his Big O ranch, 45 acres of pecan trees and cattle fences outside Macon. Friends thought he'd finally rest. Instead, he scribbled melodies from sunrise to moonrise, pacing docks, humming bass lines into a portable reel-to-reel. One idea stuck, a slow sea salt meditation inspired by gospel, folk, and the steady lap of lake water. He titled it Dock of the Bay. But something about the chorus nagged him. The lyric felt empty, maybe too quiet. To hold the place he whistled seemed harmless. He'd fix it next week. And that decision to leave a whistle instead of words would echo louder than any lyric. What happens when the loudest man in soul is ordered to say nothing at all? Post-surgery, Otis communicated through notepads, pointing and scribbling jokes about how he finally sounded like a barcaille trumpet newt. The band adjusted rehearsals around his silent nods. His kids giggled at pantomime bedtime stories. Yet inside that hush, creativity surged. He dropped the tempo on Respect, imagining a duet that would later become a gospel-infused prototype for Aretha's immortal flip. He drafted outlines for a concept album about black migration from cotton fields to concrete jungles. Dock of the Bay was different. Its laziness mirrored his doctor-ordered stillness. During the first demo, he tapped hotel room dresser drawers as kick drums, whispering verses about watchful gulls and wasted time. Steve Cropper, hearing potential, Booked studio time for early December. 3 full takes yielded a track with no horns, no call and response chorus, just understated guitar, brushed drums, and that casual whistle. Otis paced the control room. Half-pleased, half-worried listeners would label him soft. He shrugged. We'll tighten it in January. Off-mic, new anxieties brewed. He'd caught Atlantic discussing possible sale terms that lumped his next album into a corporate debt shuffle. A lawyer buddy advised creating Redwall Music, his own publishing company, to shield future songs. Otis loved the idea but realized paperwork would take months he didn't have. Meanwhile, Zelma urged a Christmas break. The kids begged for sledding lessons. He promised a short tour run, a few club gigs for extra holiday cash, then rest. The manager booked 13 shows in 11 days. To make it work, they'd lean on the freshly purchased Beechcraft H18. Despite limited avionics and no de-icing boots, it boasted plush seats, a luxury compared to the groaning bus. Otis admired its cream paint and polished prop cones. Mechanics grumbled about its age. He waved concerns away. It's faster than 4 wheels. That's all that matters. And inside that speed lay a math problem the calendar refused to solve. No matter how sweet the voice, unpaid bills hum a bass line of their own. Contracts that once looked like golden tickets now felt like velvet handcuffs. Each big venue wanted percentage cuts of merchandise. Stax wanted recoupment for studio overdub hours. Atlantic wanted advances backdated to European tours. Otis's nightly pay soared, but deductions soared higher, leaving him rich in reputation, lean in take-home. He joked to bandmates, "I've sold 1,000,000 records, but the bank teller still calls me Mr. 50. Pressure seeped into rehearsal halls. The Bar-Ks, mostly 19, 20 years old, idolized him but also peeked at the financial sausage. They knew he'd quietly bought Big O Ranch and a share of the plane. They began wondering when their cut would catch up. Otis offered mentorship in songwriting, promising co-writer splits so they'd never starve once touring days faded. That goodwill gesture half-soothed tension. But nights after shows they counted per diem per hot plate dinner and dreamed of bigger slices. Then came the throat polyp surgery bill, a figure high enough to buy 3 Cadillacs. Insurance covered little. Management advised stacking December appearances to patch medical fees. Zelma, balancing checkbooks by the fireplace, pressed him. Why not take loans against future royalties? Otis refused, wary of pawning off rights he didn't fully control. Instead, he doubled down on shows, convinced momentum would outpace liability if he kept sprinting. He also confided darker worries to Cropper. Nightmares of losing his range, of stepping on stage and croaking like a rusty hinge. Fans, he said, came for that burn in my throat, a burn he now feared might never flare the same way. The solution in his mind was to get back out fast, prove the new voice still scorched. And that meant flying through Midwestern winter, no matter how icy the forecast. Not every shortcut is shorter. Some simply hide the detour at 3,000 feet. The Beechcraft's tail number, N390R, gave Otis private plane bragging rights among peers still stuck on Greyhound schedules. It seated 8 in plush vinyl and boasted twin 450 horsepower engines, but vintage gauges lacked modern warning bells. Former owners filed intermittent magneto notes. A mild fuel vent leak once grounded the craft in Arkansas. Pilot in command duties fell to Richard Big Rick Frazier, a loyal manager who'd logged a few hundred twin-engine hours, more enthusiasm than experience. On December 9th, the entourage taped a Cleveland TV spot. Crew hailed a lake-effect snowstorm brewing across Wisconsin. Mechanics flagged minor magneto fouling, but with daylight dwindling and promoters calling Madison for arrival times, the team signed release forms and lifted off. Otis, bundled in a burgundy peacoat, sprawled across the back bench, writing setlist tweaks. Ben Cauley napped on a guitar case. He'd later recall hearing Otis hum the dock whistle between snores. In Milwaukee the next morning, ramp workers fueled up as freezing drizzle misted wings. An FBO staffer suggested overnighting, but club contracts glared. Frazier filed an instrument flight plan and double-checked carb heat levers. Instruments were old-school vacuum gyros, a single VOR, no weather radar. Frazier's logbook showed fewer than 20 total hours flying in actual icing conditions. He shrugged off caution, telling one lineman, "We flew through worse on the way up." Otis chatted about buying Zelma a bigger oven for Christmas and teased the Barkays for their matching scarves. At 3:03 p.m., engines roared to life. A frigid updraft rattled the cabin. If any second thoughts surfaced, they drowned beneath twin-prop thunder and a manager's grin. Ben Cawley would later say the takeoff looked smooth. Cloud base peeled open just long enough to let the Beechcraft vanish skyward. And in that ascent lay the hinge of everything. One decision sealed, one timetable unstoppable. 4 minutes can stretch into half a century when you're the only witness left alive. Approach to Madison's Truax Field should have been routine. Descend through scattered clouds, line up with runway 36, touchdown, taxi to a waiting limo. But weather disguised its claws. Freezing drizzle turned to granular sleet. Visibility thinned. Tower reported a 100-foot ceiling. Fraser acknowledged calmly, requested a lower altitude, and prepared for an instrument approach. At 3:27 p.m., radar showed N390R banking northeast over Lake Monona, 4 miles shy of the runway. Witnesses on John Nolan Drive saw the plane wobble, nose drop, then lurch upward as if yanked by invisible rope. Moments later, the left wing clipped the water, ripping magnesium skin like parchment. Fuselage cartwheeled, engines tore free, and silence replaced the drone faster than one could gasp. Ben Cawley shot awake, seatbelt broken, tossed into icy chaos. Adrenaline erased cold. He surfaced, clutching a seat cushion and gulped air so sharp it sliced his lungs. Wreckage bobbed like grim confetti. Trumpet cases, sheet music folders, an unwrapped Christmas present Zelma had tucked in Otis's bag. No other voice broke the hush. After 20 excruciating minutes, rescue boats rumbled through slush and hauled Ben aboard, limbs paralyzed but pulse stubborn. Investigations raked every theory: structural icing clogging carb intakes, spatial disorientation on approach, incorrect altimeter settings, weight imbalance from overloaded amps. None gelled into certainty. The official report stamped probable cause undetermined. Families wondered if magnetogremlins resurfaced. Aviators argued Fraser should have activated carb heat earlier. Skeptics pointed at the missing de-icing boots and shrugged. Inevitable. Answers drowned under 40 feet of murky water, sealed by winter's glassy crust. But ripple effects burst across the industry and the airwaves within hours. When a whistle becomes an epitaph, the aftershock can rewrite entire rule books. News bulletins raced faster than rescue divers. Dock of the Bay, still unreleased, spun on Memphis radio that same evening, its lyrics now haunted by waves lapping in listeners' minds. Atlantic rushed the single, Stax sped artwork. By March, it topped Billboard. First time a deceased artist ruled the Hot 100. The irony chilled fans. A song about quiet reflection became the loudest eulogy ever pressed to vinyl. Meanwhile, legal earthquakes cracked the soul empire. Zelma, juggling grief and creditors, fought to secure royalties for Otis's children. Redwall Music, formed just weeks earlier, became her shield against corporate clawbacks. Litigation stretched 5 years, but eventually yielded a catalog deal that ensured college funds and, decades later, licensing revenue for streaming generations never born when hi-fi turntables reigned. Aviation boards took notice too. Charter regulations stiffened. Mandatory de-icing equipment for winter routes, flight time minimums for performing artist pilots, weight and balance audits logged with photographic proof. Promoters purchased bad weather clauses, allowing penalty-free cancellations should icing advisories flash red. Musicians who once envied private plane glamour now eyed turboprops with skeptic caution. Yet numbers alone don't quantify loss. Otis left notebooks packed with half-finished tracks, rumored funk rock hybrids with Sly Stone, an orchestral spiritual with Isaac Hayes, even a skeletal civil rights anthem that, friends swear, might have rivaled A Change Is Gonna Come. Those fragments remain unreleased, trapped in magnetic hiss. Each anniversary fans speculate, how would Soul's landscape differ if he'd steered clear of that Wisconsin storm? Would the whistle have become a bridge to an even grander chorus? Monterey peers still testify. Jagger credits Otis for teaching him microphone sprint cadence. Cropper says every guitar string he bends carries Macon dust. Zelma, in quieter interviews, recalls the last hurried phone call. Tell the kids daddy's hopping on a little plane, be home soon. Those words replay in her head like a skipping record whenever she hears gulls crying over water. One lesson floats above all else. Hustle without rest courts disaster, and brilliance without boundaries can flame out before its richest hue sets. Otis sang raw truths that sliced through color lines. He also lived the caution. Speed and fatigue carve silent cracks in the runway beneath us all. So ask yourself, what masterpieces hang in the balance each time we trade caution for the fast lane? Otis Redding's roar still ricochets off arena speakers, earbuds, and algorithmic playlists. But every replay carries a silent question. What futures die young when ambition outruns foresight? Share your own near-miss tales or thoughts on the Big O's unfinished legacy below. Your story might be the warning or the inspiration that keeps another D.